I'm going to show you a presentation given by Carl Sagan in 1990, which describes how human activity is contributing to global warming and what we might do about it. I think it is just as relevant now as it was 27 years ago, and I present it here partly in response to those who have told me with apparent certainty that anthropogenic greenhouse warming is a hoax made up by Al Gore in 2006 when he released his film An Inconvenient Truth. It should be obvious to anyone who bothers to do some honest research that climate scientists have understood the connection between burning fossil fuels and rising global average temperatures for a lot longer than that, and that the temperature has been noticeably warming beyond what we would expect it to since the 1970s. Also, he talks about the hole in the ozone layer, which is much less of a problem now thanks to an international agreement to stop manufacturing CFC gases. Something else he mentions is rising human population. Since this talk was given, human numbers have increased by over 2 billion. This and its implications are rarely discussed. Anyway, here is Carl Sagan speaking to a largely religious audience in 1990.
Thank you, Jim, for that most generous introduction. I'm very happy to be here with you, and because we're about half an hour behind schedule and I had wanted to leave time for questions from the audience, I'll try to shorten what I had intended to say. This is a most peculiar issue, that humans have become, in this innocent manner, a danger to themselves. We're not here talking about nuclear war, where at least there is some intent to do harm. We're talking about the most innocent acts of burning a lump of coal or developing a harmless and inert material to act as the working fluid in refrigerators and air conditioners. Who would have figured that that would pose a danger? When we started out, we humans, a few 100,000 years ago, or if you take the genus Homo, maybe a few million years ago, there were, of course, very few of us. We lived in East Africa. Our technology was rudimentary. And we had no idea of posing a danger to the global environment. We didn't have an idea of there being a global environment. Nevertheless, if contemporary hunter-gatherer societies are any guide, we had a very profound sense of living in harmony with nature, as all the rest of the plants and animals do, because those who don't are dead. And so natural selection produces such a harmony. And there's no question that we were part of such a harmony. Now imagine the pages falling from the calendar. The advantage of the human species, selective advantage, is our intelligence, our ability to foresee the future consequences of present actions, and our hands, which permit us to build. And with those tools, we have gone to every part of the earth. Some of us live under the oceans. Some of us live in space. We have been astonishingly successful. Our numbers now are 5.3 billion, and our technology has reached formidable, if not awesome, proportions. If there was no concept of having stewardship of the earth a million years ago, today there is at least a very great need. If you stand back from the earth, as those Apollo astronauts did in the late 60s, and photograph the earth from a distance in space so you can see the whole earth, there's this blue aura that you can see surrounding the daylit hemisphere. And it's just the atmosphere seen edge on. And what is most impressive, what many astronauts have remarked upon, is how thin, how fragile, how vulnerable it seems. The thickness of the Earth's atmosphere compared to the size of the Earth is about the same as the thickness of a coat of shellac on a library globe of the Earth. There isn't much air. And so we now have the prospect of inadvertently endangering the life-supporting environment, the environment that supports the human species and many other species, of committing what religious people sometimes call crimes against creation. There's a wide range of these problems that I know you've talked about at this meeting. There are some local, some regional, and some global. Let me talk about the two of the global issues, in part because they are among the most serious, and in part because they force upon us a way of thinking which is novel to many, although it certainly has deep roots in the world's religious communities. Those two problem areas are ozone depletion and greenhouse warming. The ozone layer, if brought down to the pressure and temperature of this room, would be about that thick, about 3 millimeters thick. There isn't much ozone. It protects us against dangerous ultraviolet light from the sun, which, if not impeded, if it could reach the surface of the Earth, would produce a range of catastrophes. The one that's most discussed is skin cancer, especially in light-skinned people like me. Dark-skinned people are much better protected. And that certainly would be serious, but that's minor compared to the other longer-term consequences, which include a challenge to the human immune system, the ability to fight disease. If the ozone layer is breached and people have to spend some time out of doors, it's something like getting a global case of AIDS, except there's nothing special you have to do to get the AIDS, except keep voting for the same politicians. And then still more serious is the fact that increased ultraviolet light damages the microorganisms that are at the base of the food chain upon which the rest of us depend. So the simplest example of this is the oceanic food chain, where at the ocean surface there is a community of one-celled microscopic plants called phytoplankton. And they harvest sunlight. They're primary photosynthetic producers, but since they're at the surface of the oceans, if there's more ultraviolet light getting through the ozone layer, they are vulnerable to a depletion in the ozone layer. Well, these guys are eaten by little one-celled animals, which are eaten by little shrimp-like crustacea, which are eaten by little fish, which are eaten by bigger fish, which are eaten by, and so on. And then at the top of this ecological pyramid are dolphins, whales, and people. And on the land, there is a similar food chain in which, again, the primary photosynthetic producers are vulnerable. So if you eliminate the organisms at the base of the food chain, then the rest of the food chain collapses as well. That's the ultimate danger of ozone depletion. Greenhouse warming is the buildup of invisible gases. Their invisibility is precisely part of the problem, because you can't just by looking see that there's a danger, which keep the heat in and build up the temperature of the Earth, producing great regions of drought in continental interiors, including the American Midwest, and through the volume expansion of seawater and the melting of polar ice, sea level rising. And some of the projections for the end of the next century are extremely serious, drought, the destruction of croplands worldwide, an assault on natural ecosystems, and a rising of sea level sufficient to, for example, flood Bangladesh and produce tens of millions of environmental refugees. These problems are very serious. They are happening, however, slow enough that it's possible to do something about it. The slowness is an advantage in that respect, but a great disadvantage in another respect, in that the changes are occurring on timescales longer than the terms of office of politicians. If a politician can take a presumed unpopular action, which will, in his or her estimation, benefit the politician while still in office, then that's the kind of risk that politicians are willing to take. If the benefit, however, happens 10 or 30 or 50 years in the future to benefit some other office holder, then from the narrow perspective of getting reelected, it's not nearly so attractive. These long timescales represent one of the novel problems of these global environmental issues. Now, I want to stress that we are not absolutely certain what the configuration of danger will be. For the ozone layer, we can already clearly see it. There's no question of, is there an ozone depletion? There is this enormous hole over Antarctica, about which William Riley talked, a smaller one over the Arctic, and a clear thinning of the ozone layer at intermediate latitudes, including the latitude of Washington. And the telltale chlorine atoms of the CFCs have been found in association with the ozone depletion. So there it's very clear what's happening. You stop making CFCs and other sources of ozone depleting chemicals, and the ozone layer will, on a time scale of 100 years, heal itself. But note the time scale. Make heroic actions now, and the ultimate benefit is a century hence. Delay longer, the healing is also delayed longer. On greenhouse warming, there is not yet so clear a signature. There is a range of what in this business are called sophisticated computer models, but of course they're only as sophisticated as the people who write the computer programs. But there are 5 different such programs. They all give consonant answers. They predict correctly the very different climates of, say, Mars and Venus. Venus, by the way, having a surface temperature of 900 Fahrenheit, hotter than the hottest household oven, hot enough to melt tin and lead because of a massive carbon dioxide greenhouse effect there. I'm not suggesting that there were once a species of Venusians who drove fuel-inefficient automobiles, and that's why Venus is in trouble. But the idea of an Earth-like world gone to such hellish conditions is worthy of note. By the way, the surface, this is a theological aside, the surface conditions of Venus are remarkably similar to the classic religious view of hell, in case you have to confront a skeptic who wants to know where it is. I thought I'd provide a little help here and there on theological matters where I am able. Those same computer models correctly predict the past climate of the Earth. They correctly predict the present climate of the Earth. It is reasonable that they are correctly predicting the future climate of the Earth, given the amount of CO2 and other greenhouse gases that we're pouring into the atmosphere. Maybe not. Maybe there's some undiscovered mistake that all of the scientists involved in these models are making. It's not impossible. We can't be 100% sure. But which is more prudent? Which is wiser? to do nothing and hope that a mistake has been made, or to take these predictions seriously even if there's a chance the precautions you will take will be unnecessary. I want now to come back to this issue by discussing what it is that has to be done. And then let's think about them in the context of, will we really be angry at ourselves for having taken these steps if the computer models are wrong? So what should you do? First thing you should do is stop producing CFCs, the chlorofluorocarbons. See, they do double duty. Not only do they destroy the ozone layer, they are an important greenhouse gas. They'll get us one way or another. So we should stop producing them. And indeed, in a remarkable and important agreement of most of the relevant nations, there is a so-called Montreal Protocol in which essentially all the CFC producing nations except for India and China, two important exceptions, have agreed to cut by 1/2 their production of these molecules by the turn of the century. It's important, its precedent is important, but it's not nearly enough. Those gases should be reduced to zero. That's the first thing we ought to do. Secondly, to mitigate greenhouse warming, we should use fossil fuels more efficiently. By that I mean, if I had a car that went 70 miles a gallon instead of one that went 25 miles a gallon, I would not be putting as much carbon dioxide into the atmosphere for each mile that I go in driving my car. This is a kind of technological solution or mitigation of the problem. On the other hand, there's not something that we can do as individuals. I cannot go and drive a 75 mile per gallon automobile because they are not commercially available. So it's no good to tell me, as my friend Mr. Riley did, that we shouldn't complain to the government or the industry, we should just do it ourselves. How shall I go about by myself driving a 75 mile per gallon automobile? I'll be glad to take instruction on this issue. I'm ready. But seems to me this requires some activity in Washington and Detroit. Ultimately, we're going to want to phase out fossil fuels. We're going to want to convert to an alternative energy economy. And what that is, we can still discuss, but in my view, it is unlikely to be nuclear power for all the obvious pollution concerns, and much more promising is solar power, which produces no greenhouse gases and does not involve radioactivity and is already economically competitive with fossil fuels if we take account of the environmental cost of the burning of those fossil fuels. That's the kind of technology we should be after. And incidentally, because developing countries tend to be located in equatorial latitudes where there's more sunlight, this is also an ideal kind of technology and could be, for them, and could be much more indigenous, that is, the technology homegrown, than big fission or fusion reactors. Then we should grow trees. Trees take carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere. We need massive reforestation on a global scale. Instead, what we are doing right now is destroying an acre of forest every second. Think about that for just a second. There goes an acre. Whole acre of forest every second, day after day, year after year. We're being extremely stupid. And then the final thing, in my view, which has to happen, has to do with world population growth. Because even if we took the most heroic measures about stopping the production of CFCs and making much greater fossil fuel efficiency, and then on a longer time scale converting to alternatives to fossil fuels, and grow enormous amounts of new forests, even then we would be not out of the woods at all if the number of new humans overwhelms the steps we're taking. Every human being has a right to live, and what's more, even in exceptionally poor countries, in your everyday life, you produce carbon dioxide. So if we look at who are the biggest polluters on the planet in terms of greenhouse gases, number one by far is the United States, something we should take just pride in. Number two is the Soviet Union. Number three is the developing countries put together. So it's not an issue of high technology versus low technology, although that per capita, of course, Americans do much more than people in Equatorial Guinea. But even people without elaborate industrial economies make significant contributions to the burning of wood to the greenhouse problem. And by the way, I can talk about it in the question period at greater length, but in my opinion, the only appropriate way of approaching the solution of world population growth is by helping to raise the per capita income of the poorest billion people on the planet. It's a thing called the demographic transition, and it happens in capitalist countries, in communist countries, in Catholic countries, in Buddhist countries, East and West. It's fabulously ecumenical. And what it is poor people have lots of children not because they're stupid and not because they don't know about birth control, although those things, having birth control access helps, of course, but because they make a kind of desperate cost-benefit analysis that if their children are dying at an enormous rate, if they have lots of children, then there might be some to survive to help with whatever the domestic economy is, and maybe even survive to such a time when the parents are too old and would help the parent. It's the only available social security for 1 billion poor people on the planet. When the per capita income rises and there are alternative sources of help for the meager plot of land and help for the old age of the parents, then without the government ever saying a word, the population growth rate turns around. And I find this is true of many Americans. Think back 3 generations in your own family. How many children did your great-great-grandmother have? How many children do you or your siblings have? And you will see a substantial drop in almost every case in the birth rate. And that has happened because the economy has improved, the per capita income has gone up in this most affluent nation. Those are the steps which need to be taken. How many of them can be done by individual effort? It seems to me that this is a case where the main driver has to be government and industry. And there is, of course, a role for individuals. And that is one of the blessings of democracies. And that is, individuals can play their part by voting out of office recalcitrant politicians. It's very straightforward. I can't improve the greenhouse effect much on my own by my own energy economy at home. I can make some contribution, but I can make a bigger contribution by voting against politicians who say that they can't do anything about this problem. There was 2 or 3 weeks ago in Washington a international conference on the greenhouse effect hosted by the White House. This is the one where the White House was accused of urging study rather than doing anything, of going slow, of stressing uncertainties to the enormous annoyance of delegates from all over the world, especially from Western Europe. It's almost nobody who supported the United States position on this. And at the end, U.S. delegates were reduced to saying, oh, we're not just for studying, we want to do things too, but didn't specify anything in particular. There was a very telling diagram in the White House handouts. It was stressing the complex issues involved here, and each issue that was stressed had a little cartoon to make it clear to people who had difficulty reading what the issue was. And there was one issue called balance. And what it showed was a traditional pen scales, 2 trays. In one tray was the planet Earth. And then balancing it on the other tray were 4 bars of gold. A balance. 4 bars of gold, the Earth. Well, don't want to fix the Earth because it might cost money. I think that is a very revealing as well as a very bad example for the White House to be telling us. Yes, economic growth is important. Yes, it's even conceivable that poor people benefit if rich people make more money. But if the environment that sustains all of us is significantly deteriorating, I suggest that even the people who are making money are going to be in trouble. Industry is going to be in trouble. The national economy is going to be even in more trouble. And this is the classic battle between short-term and long-term, which is central to the issue that we're fighting. Well, in an attempt to try to deal in a practical sense with these issues, as Jim Morton mentioned to you, it occurred to us that this was a time for science and religion to see if they could work together on this most important question. So I wrote an appeal, was able to get a number of very distinguished scientists from many nations, men and women, to sign it. And then through the good offices of Dean Morton, this appeal was distributed to the world religious community, or some representative sample of it, with very striking success. The letter that was sent to religious leaders was signed, besides Dean Morton, by Theodore Hesburgh, former president of the University of Notre Dame, the Reverend Leonid Kishkovsky, the president of the National Council of Churches, Sheikh Ahmad Kuftaro, the Grand Mufti of Syria, and Elie Wiesel, Nobel Peace Laureate. And in the brochure put out by the Cathedral of St. John the Divine, there's a list of the categories of signatories: 37 heads of national and international religious bodies, 50 cardinals, lamas, archbishops, head rabbis, patriarchs, mullahs, and bishops, 17 indigenous religious leaders, 55 professors of theology, seminary presidents, cathedral deans, heads of religious orders, and so on. It's breathtakingly ecumenical, who the signatories are, and I think shows a very great promise that religious people worldwide recognize that this is a serious issue and are willing to work to solve it. I'd like to read to you the last part of this appeal. We first describe some of the issues as I have done here, and then go on to say, By their very nature, these assaults on the environment were not caused by any one political group or any one generation. Intrinsically, they are transnational, transgenerational, and trans-ideological. So are all conceivable solutions. To escape these traps requires a perspective that embraces the peoples of the planet and all the generations yet to come. Problems of such magnitude and solutions demanding so broad a perspective must be recognized from the outset as having a religious as well as a scientific dimension. Mindful of our common responsibility, we scientists, many of us long engaged in combating the environmental crisis, urgently appeal to the world religious community to commit in word and in deed, and as boldly as is required, to preserve the environment of the earth. Some of the short-term mitigations of these dangers, such as greater energy efficiency, rapid banning of chlorofluorocarbons, or modest reductions in the nuclear arsenals, are comparatively easy and, at least at some level, are already underway. But other, more far-reaching, more long-term, more effective approaches will encounter widespread inertia, denial, and resistance. In this category are conversion from fossil fuels to a non-polluting energy economy, a continuing swift reversal of the nuclear arms race, and a voluntary halt to world population growth, without which many of the other approaches to preserve the environment will be nullified. As on issues of peace, human rights, and social justice, religious institutions can here too be a strong force encouraging national and international initiatives in both the private and public sectors, and in the diverse worlds of commerce, education, culture, and mass communication. The environmental crisis requires radical changes, not only in public policy, but also in individual behavior. The historical record makes clear that religious teaching, example, and leadership are powerfully able to influence personal conduct and commitment. As scientists, many of us have had profound experiences of awe and reverence before the universe. We understand that what is regarded as sacred is more likely to be treated with care and respect. Our planetary home should so be regarded. Efforts to safeguard and cherish the environment need to be infused with a vision of the sacred. At the same time, a much wider and deeper understanding of science and technology is needed. If we do not understand the problem, it is unlikely we will be able to fix it. Thus, there is a vital role for both religion and science. And then the last paragraph reads, "We know that the well-being of our planetary environment is already a source of profound concern in your councils and congregations. We hope this appeal will encourage a spirit of common cause and joint action to help preserve the earth." So I'm very encouraged that this document, which I consider to be not pulling a lot of punches, has received such strong and ecumenical support. I'd like to conclude with just a couple of other remarks. There is a passage in the book of Proverbs that haunts me in this context, although of course it wasn't written in this context. It goes, "They set an ambush for their own lives." And it seems to me that through the unthinking development of our enormously powerful technology, we are in danger of doing just that. But it is certainly not too late. We have caught the problems early enough, and all it takes is a deep, committed dedication to solve these issues. And it seems to me that there is a peculiar silver lining. And it goes like this. Molecules don't have passports. They're exceptionally stupid. They don't understand the profound importance of the idea of national sovereignty. So you strike a match or burn a lump of coal or drive your car, And the carbon dioxide is wafted up and carried by the general circulation of the Earth's atmosphere everywhere. No one nation can solve the greenhouse or ozone depletion problem. It has to be done by everybody on Earth. It requires a global effort. So these problems, as I said in the appeal, have an intrinsic trans-ideological, transnational, and transgenerational aspect to them. It doesn't matter what your ideology is. If you want to resolve these problems, you're going to have to work closely with other nations. And if you truly want to understand what this issue is about, you must be concerned about generations as yet unborn. It seems to me that binding up of the earth and of the generations is something that many religious traditions have talked about, and here is a case in which if we do not embrace these broad and grand perspectives, we are in the deepest of trouble. I believe we are an intelligent species, we are equal to this task, and we are about to see a transformation of human society. Thank you. Superb. Is Dr. Malone?